O Lord my God, when I in awesome wonder consider all the worlds thy hands have made, I see the stars, I hear the rolling thunder, thy power throughout the universe display. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. Then my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art.
When you look at young girls that have not have had a father or not had affection, you do anything for affection. So you see them compromising in relationships just to get a hug, just to get some affection because they've been starved of it. So they're starving. So we try to put some structure around something that is anemic, that has not had any. You can put structure around something when there's abundance of it, but you can't put structure around somebody that's starving. A dog in a kennel is looking for love. They're looking for everybody that walks down that. They learn quickly that everybody that walks down the little hallway and looks into their cage, and they're looking to see if you'll take them out. If you take them out of the cage, that's a dog. People that are raised, men and women, this is how young men get into gangs, because it's some kind of an affiliation with belonging and some kind of love. And then when you have young women who are starving for affection, if the affection has to come with sex that prior to marriage, and so be it. That's the exchange they're willing to enter into just to feel loved and just to feel wanted and not just criticize and beat down. Now, these types of discussions that I'm mentioning to you come from being raised by a broken parent. Now, if you're raised in a single household or raised by a broken parent that is trying to find affection themselves, then you have this displacement. You have mothers that's competing with the daughters because they're still trying to find love because of their own brokenness. Daddies that don't feel adequate, so they keep running from relationship to relationship, and that's why you have the baby mama scenario that comes up. It's because broken. So before we can do any type of ministering, the first battle plan, the first call to action is to be loving. You have got to love. You cannot even minister to people till you love them. And love comes in just say it, demonstrate it. You have to step into the thing. It costs you something. It costs something to love somebody. It's an investment. It's I remember telling one of my friends, I said, friendship is expensive, because once you become a friend, that means just by the nature of the real word, if you call me, if it's within my grasp, I'm there. Whatever you have, I'm there. I will help you. I will cover you. I will, they have said, I'll hold your hair while you have to throw up in the toilet. It's all that. It's whatever it requires. Friendships are expensive. To be available for people is very expensive. because it costs you something, not monetarily only. It costs you something from your heart. You actually will be hurt if something happens to them. You actually have to show up if something happens to them. You actually have to get on there and pray for them. You got to actually go into the pit, the ditch, and sit in there with them. Friendship is expensive, and how to make yourself available. Bankrupt people are selfish. People that have never had anything and are not wealthy in that area are very stingy because they can't risk it, because they can't trust. That's that second magic word. Love is the first word. Trust is the second word. When people are trying to heal animals, they first have to make a connection with the animal and gain the trust. And as they can't start training, they can't start anything until the animal trusts them. And that's just humans are the same way. Kids are the same way. An effective teacher makes brilliant at what they do. I don't know who that is. Let me see. They don't know. Whoever is trying to clear your throat or scratch your ear, put yourself on mute, please. And hold on one second.
I apologize. I got it. We're muted.
Okay, thank you. So we had somebody on here that fell asleep one time. That was funny. Okay, so anyway, but love, you have to be really good at it. And that means, if you've ever seen a teacher that's really good at what they do, they learn their students before they start teaching, because they recognize that every person learns differently. You have kids that come into, there was a movie called A Tree, I think it was A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, or something like that. It was about, I think it was called A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. I can't, but the little girl, they were very, 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 very poor. And, there's poor and then there's really, really poor. And, like example, there was these girls that were going to school in Africa, and they had one dress, and they just switched days. One day one sister would go to school, one day the other sister would go to school, and they switched the dress out. They had one dress, like that kind of poor. And this little girl was going to school, and her father managed to get her into a very good school. And there was a basket at Christmas time, all the kids had created a basket to give to a poor family, and she stood up and said, "I know a family that could really use this, and I'll give it to them." And so she went in, and the teacher recognized she was talking about herself. So the teacher called her up and gave her the basket, and then gave her the rest of the pie, and said they may like the pie as well. But, kids are easy to read. And she gave her all that, and she took it home to give it to her mother, who was doing the best she could. And it was just a point of the teacher recognizing who's in the classroom while maintaining the dignity of all the students. This thing here, you have 30 students, and you have some students that come you look at their hands are washed, you look at their fingernails are clean, you look and see if their faces are washed, is their hair combed, do they have on clean socks? There's some things you look at. Are those the same clothes they wore yesterday? Are their clothes washed? If I might have said that already, but are their clothes clean? And you can see, and so then the next thing a teacher would do would be to meet the parents. Some parents have got several children. Some parents are struggling. Some parents are doing the best they can just to get them to the door of the classroom. And some parents have domestic issues, substance abuse on the parent side. There's things that happen. There's more than one way to bless a child and to bless a family. You can bless a family with stability. You can bless your family with consistent love is worth gold. Consistent love. Silver and gold have I not, but such that I have I give to you. Now Paul and Peter, I think it was Paul and Peter, he told the man, rise and walk. But you can say that same thing, such that you have, I give to you. Sometimes grandmothers don't have a lot of money, but they got a lot of love, and they got a lot of wisdom. And they shoring up the foundation of that child in that way. Sometimes you think that you can live in a very big house and it can be very empty, lack of love. And then you can live in a smaller house. I gotta find that poem. It's very powerful. When I first heard about it, I realized this is part of knowing where the treasure is. This is part of knowing how to where the richness of what God is and what He really, really does. So let me see. I got to find that Napoleon. I'm going to read it to you so you can understand. Okay. I'll find it when we're going to take a few seconds. Let me see. Napoleon poem. Okay. So it was here it is. Oh no, I'll find it. There's a poem that somebody Google. I'd rather be a farmer, and it's a poem about Napoleon. And tell me if you find it. Let me see. You got to hear why. Hold on. Let me just hold on 1 second. A farmer. Then let's put this. Let me see Napoleon. Okay, hold on. Okay, here it is. Okay, hold on 1 second. This one is all right, this is a long poem, but I'm going to read it. And you have to understand where greatness really lies. And you have to understand what you're doing when like I said, you don't know what you're doing when you're doing it. And you might, with your little simple, and I don't say it in a bad way, I say it just in the humility of being a single human being. But with your little simple life, you can change the lives of millions of people indirectly by changing the lives of the people around you directly. By pouring this element that is so important that escapes so many people, but it's more precious than gold. Before I got on the prayer line, I had to send out texts to people. I make sure I tell my husband that I love him. And I'd make sure that's the first kiss in the morning. I make sure I tell him that I make sure that he knows it. And I know that, people, when I communicate with them, I make sure that I let them know that. But it's not, I didn't realize it, that love is a ministry unto itself. And that's your first one. And proof of it, you can have all these other little gifts, fancy talk, prophetic, da-da-da-da-da. I got to stop saying da-da-da-da-da, but prophetic qualities, and you can do this and you can do that. If you cannot love properly without judgment, if you cannot pour it on like salve, like lotion that you put on a person, if you cannot love, you're bankrupt. You're of no avail. You're like, and sounding brass is a very good description, but nothing is happening, because that's the first. The battle plan is love. The battlefield, you proceed. You start with love. You saturate with love, and you finish with love. It's the only thing. It is so important. You know how important it is. Babies, okay, it's going to be a minute here because there's a lot of material. In the neo prenatal preemie baby ward. Okay, thank you, Father. Okay, I got 3 stories lined up. I'm trying to get through it as quickly as I can. These are true. In the baby ward, they have people that come in, volunteers that come in to hold the babies. That's all they do. They hold the babies. They rub on them. They feel the body connection. They feel your heartbeat, and they feel the discussion. It's nothing like being held and loved. It just allows you to. It allows you to swim in your spirit. It allows you to swim. It allows you to move around. It allows you to feel safe. It allows you to unfold. I was listening to Alice Walker. I think that's her name, the one that wrote The Color Purple. I was on a whole Color Purple Oprah thing yesterday, and I will tell you guys about it. It was absolutely necessary. And so I was listening to her talk. It's one thing to read somebody's books. It's another thing to hear the author themselves read their own words. And you go, oh, that's what it's supposed to sound like. Oh, that's what it's supposed to be. And she was talking about a place that she was doing a memorial, and they had to change the burial ground of some buried slaves. And she was talking, and I have to tell you, this slavery thing, you guys, you hear me talking about it, and I talk about the Jewish Holocaust, but it's not, everybody suffered from it. Black people and white people suffered from it. The memory of the thing happened in our country. Everybody suffered from the horrific parts of it. Kids now are struggling with how did that happen? Of all colors. Or trying to figure out how did something like that happen. But she was talking about they had to move the bones of the slaves and move them to a new burial place. And they said when they dug them up, that because it's a mass grave, it's not like they had names and all that, and they so many of the shoulder blades of the slaves were all worn out from carrying things that they shouldn't have carried, and then so many of the shoulder blades were worn out, and then so many of them were young people or kids that were just worked to death until they died, and then tossed into a mass grave or buried, and like a dog or something, and then that's how it was. And she said that, and she said she couldn't get it out of her mind, and so you can see the capacity. The capacity to be cruel comes from lack of love. And you have cultures that spend time being very sure that they don't love you too much. They don't compliment you too much. And then if you're a woman, you don't have too much self-confidence. You don't have too much of yourself, that you become a peg in a bigger process, and that you don't actually have the ability to bloom into your individual person that you are. They make sure of that. She talked about genital there's a word for it. It's when you mutilation, genital mutilation, and that's happening still to this day, that somebody would cut a woman's body so she doesn't feel any pleasure, but so it took out her. And what Alice Walker was saying, it made you blind. It made you sexually blind, because now you can't have affection for a person or something that you actually, so you understand the basis for so much that happens that's wrong in the world comes from lack of love. So people take any kind of love. They'll take love if they have to sell their body and give the money to somebody else. They'll take love if it has to be along somebody that's going to get them addicted to a drug. They'll take love if it's going to have them go into partnership with the devil at some kind of a way, because love is love. It's just so desperate for something. So desperate to feel somebody's hands around them. So desperate to feel a kind voice. So desperate to feel a hug. There was one of the women's organizations that I belong to. There was a lady there. Her business was hugs. That's all she did. She hugged. She would hug everybody in the meeting. She would hug everybody in the in where she would send hugs virtually, but she would hug everybody, and it would be good, long, strong hugs. It would be a hug that said, "I see you. I feel you. I know you are a person. I know you are here. I know your name." I remember watching. I told you guys a story before. My son was in Ralph's parking lot, and I know personally he only had $2 in his pocket. I know that's all the money he had, and a lady walked up, and I don't know what she was asking, but she was walking up, and homeless people are already beat down. They're already humble. You don't have to prove a point by giving them money, but you can give it to them with dignity. You can ask them to please take it. Can you please? And and so she asked for money to buy coffee or something simple. And he pulled out that $2 and handed it to her, and he said, "What's your name?" And she broke out, tears popped out of her eyes. And I watched the whole thing, and I was amazed. And she said, she said, "Nobody has asked me my name. It's so long, nobody has even asked me." She gave her name. And she was grateful that he asked her what her name. He said, and it was, he said, let's say for sake of conversation, Sheila, he said, "Sheila, I'll be back tomorrow, and if I have some more money, I'll give you some more money." And she said, he made a friend. And he's always, I don't know what it was. He's always done that. It was raining one day, and he was in his apartment with his girlfriend. It was a lady around the corner, and there was one on the corner, one on the other corner, and he took both of them hot glass of tea, and he knew their names, and he had spoken to them in depth. He knew what they were, what they used to do. He knew who they were. And I said, "Michi, how do you know these people?" He says, "I know them. My mom, they're people." He says, and he goes and talks to them, and he goes and he spends time. The conversation is priceless. So would you rather have a really wonderful meal by yourself, or a lesser meal in the company of somebody that's going to talk to you and feed your soul and just talk to you? Just talk to you. "I see you." It's a simple thing. To give of yourself is such a simple thing, and you have unlimited capacity to love people. It's the wealth that you can leave that will make people feel very, very, very rich. Speaking of which, I'm going to read this poem, and then I'm going to tell you a story. This was not the plan, but this is very important because this is what you need. Apparently, you need to understand, because we chase money, and that's like the last thing you need. You can't take it with you. Okay, I'm going to read the part and start, and then I'm going to skip down. It says, "A little while ago, I stood by the grave of the old Napoleon, a magnificent tomb of gilt and gold." If you guys have ever seen it, I don't think Bonaparte. I think it says Bonaparte on it, but I think it has hardly anything. It's a very simple, big marble. But it's one of the most beautiful tombs you'd ever see. The magnificent. Hold on, let me take this out. The magnificent tomb of gilt and gold. It's almost of a dead. It fit almost for a dead deity, and gazed upon the sarcophagus. I think I'm saying that right. Rare and nameless marble. Yes, there's no name on it. Where rests at last the ashes of the restless man. I leaned over to the banister and thought about the career of the greatest soldier of the modern world. I saw him walking upon the banks of the Seine, sin. Contemplating, it's the river in France, contemplating suicide. I saw him at Toulon. I saw him putting down the mob in the streets of Paris. I saw him at the head of the army in Italy. I saw him crossing the bridge of Lodi with the tricolor in his hand. That's the French flag. I saw him in Egypt in the shadows of the pyramids. I saw him conquer the Alps and mingle the eagles of France the eagles of France with the eagles of the crags. I saw him in Marigot, at Elm, at Austerlitz. I saw him in Russia, where the infirmary of the snow and the cavalry and the wild blast scattered his legions like winter's withered leaves. I saw him at Leipzig in defeat and disaster, driven by a million bayonets back upon Paris. Okay. Now we're going to skip down. I thought of, you guys can read this. It's the I would rather, and then you put Napoleon, and it'll come up, bring it up. I thought of the orphans and the widows he had made, of the tears that he had shed, of his glory, and of the only woman who ever loved him, pushed from his heart. Oh goodness, he's saying something here. And of the woman that the only woman that ever loved him, pushed from his heart by the cold hand of ambition. I said I would rather have been listen, this is the important part. Pushed by the cold hand of ambition. And I said I would rather have been a French peasant and worn wooden shoes. I would rather have lived in a hut with a vine growing over the door and the grapes growing purple in the kisses of the autumn sun, which is an absolutely spectacular visual. Autumn sun. I would rather have been the poor peasant with my loving wife by my side, knitting as the day died out in the sky. With my children upon my knees and their arms about me, I would rather have been that man and gone down to the tongueless silence of the dreamless dust than to have been that imperial impersonation of force and the murderer known as Napoleon the Great. I would rather have been a farmer. I would rather have been a farmer. Simplicity of life. The great things you can do in a simple, quiet way. The great things that you can do that you don't realize change and move people's lives. You can be so great in your exquisite application of love in the lives of other people. You can be so great by learning how to connect and to listen and then give. Giving is not money only. You can give, like I said, grandmothers that sit in great wisdom. And I remember watching a lady on TV talking to her little redhead grandchild, and she was explaining what all had to happen for him to be there. And she was explaining to him how important he was because he was cutting up. But she was explaining to him how, and thank you, Father. Thank you, Jesus. I hope I can share that too. She was explaining, grandmothers make masterpieces. Let me just put it that way. Grandmothers make masterpieces. Mothers and fathers do too, but grandmothers have time to do that crafting of the personality of loving on their grandchildren and speaking life into them. And she sat on the porch and told him let me back up again, the simple process, like, you know, how you pick, this is why the good thing about a garden, because it takes time. And God can speak to you when you stand still. And sometimes when you do very simple tasks, if you noticed, when you're taking a shower, or you're folding clothes, are you taking a walk? Are you picking beans? Something very simple. Your brain, so he's taught, for some reason, I do not know why, but I guess because we're still enough, he speaks in the midst of while you're doing a simple task. And hanging out clothes in the laundry. Do you guys remember the visual? If you've ever had the blessing of having a clothesline and where you can hang out your laundry with the clothes hangers, and the sun and the wind and the fresh air blows your clothes dry, and there's such a, just that watching your clothes on the line blow in the line. I remember when I used to hang my clothes out, and when my son was a baby, I would look, because I love clotheslines and fresh clothes, and I would hang him out, and I would put his, there was a string, and I would hang him out there, and then I would say, "Thank you, God. I have a baby. I got baby clothes to hang out on the line, two little bitty T-shirts with one little clip." But I remember thanking God that I had. And I was trying to wash the diapers, but that went off very quickly. I couldn't do that. I was like, I got to buy Pampers. This is not going to work. But just the fact that I put them, you can tell a lot about laundry when you know how clean it is if somebody took the time to really do what they needed to do. And if you have, these things are small things. These are simple tasks, but these tasks matter. And so, getting back. The simple task of, she was sitting on the porch and she was talking to this little boy, and she was explaining how many people had to come into existence just to make him, with his red hair and his freckles and all the uniqueness that he had. He said, you came from thousands of years of creation. People came together, princes came together, soldiers came together, and wives came together. People came from all around the world just to make you. And here you stand with your freckles and your red hair. You're not just, and she called out his name, you are the lineage of many, many, many people. And you are very, very important. And you could see her speaking this stature into him, and how this thing called self-respect, and this thing called, I have to do better because people are expecting me to do better. I'm better than this. I have to live up to what's expected of me. And he pulled himself up, and he started operating better. And then he graduated, and she talked, and it was the talk she used to have with him about who he was. And that, that was a thing that was love in words. And so that was important. You gotta get your craft together. Your craft is love. That's all you're here to do. That's all you're here to do. And you have mechanisms on how you're going to make that thing happen. But you have to, I am in the process of creating a masterpiece. And, I thought I'm in the process of creating a masterpiece, and the biggest tool that never gives up, that keeps going in, that keeps shaping. And you have to, and when I say I'm in the process of creating a masterpiece, I'm not talking about the business, I'm talking about people, person. I am talking specifically, hold on. Just trying to make sure. Anyway, there's quite a few people on here. Okay, I'm talking specifically about how I love and how I have loved my husband. But I didn't realize that the way that I love people and the way that I show up, that it changes people. And it's not that I'm perfect or anything, far, far from it, but the engagement of engaging individuals and engaging people. You have to be really good at loving people in order to help make the shift. You have to love them. You have to love them. And you cannot be insecure loving people. You can't, I think I said this a long time ago, you have to love like a bird flies. You cannot fly, guarding your heart. You can't take your two wings and cover your chest. You ain't getting off the ground. But you have to soar. You have to give into the thing. You have to abandon concern. And one of the things I really loved about myself is my ability to abandon, to toss caution to the wind, and to love all, to get all the way in there with both hands and both feet, and really love whomever I am loving. And I love everybody, but I really pay attention to who this person is, what's going on, what I'm doing. You cannot function as a human being. You're no good without it. If you don't know how to love people, you are of no value. You are a part of the problem, because hurt people don't know how to give. They don't know how to express compliments. They don't know how to use those words that build their speech and craft something that's going to change the soul of somebody else, that's going to give to them. You have to have an abundance of love. It just needs to ooze out of you. And then you have to be able to do it. And you have to pay attention, because what your question is, how do I love this person? How, because healing comes after trust, and that comes after love. They have to believe you. Belief is a component of trust. And so all the things that God's going to do come out of love. You gotta love. That is how people get converted. That's how people go from one place to the next. That is how people transition. It's all love. So there was a lady, the man that, I think I told you guys the story, the man that wrote the book called, what is that? The Shack. He wrote the book called The Shack. And this is a story about his mother, which I think is the most incredible story ever. I would say, don't learn how to do evil. Don't allow anybody to teach you how to be less of a human being than you are. Don't allow a person to sometimes people will say it doesn't take all of that, and you don't have to do this. And they just tell you what you don't have to, and they just talk you out of being who you are. And if you are gifted with the blessing of vulnerability, if you are gifted with the blessing of being able to love somebody and not care, be able to give and not look for something in return, to give your last, to give what you have, to give whatever it is. If you have the blessing of being able to have an open heart, don't ever let people starve for that. They don't have it. And if you have the ability to be, and I tell women in relationships, don't love less. Don't love less. You love more. Stay in there. And that doesn't mean that the person's going to love you back. But if you are in the relationship or you have to leave the relationship, do not let it change you into a lesser loving being. A lesser loving being. You have to always love more, as much as you can. Abandon yourself to it. Every time. You're not going to get to the good part of love until you abandon yourself to it, until you empty your pocket, until you do all that you can do, until you know that you have dropped it so good that they'll never be able to replace you. In anything, in your job, in your relationship, in anything that you do, they'll never be able to replace the love. That's how you love. You love like you love. I remember Shantae telling me one time, she says, to stay married, you got to love like you're crazy, because you got to love past the faults of the person. And I think that's an excellent description. You got to love like you're crazy, because common sense leaves early on. Common sense is like, good, thank you, I will take my parting gifts, goodbye. But the love like you're crazy forgives. You can't get the gold done if you're going to keep count, because keeping count, it's good. It's a good 5 minutes and you're out of there. You got to love past that, especially when you're dealing with broken people. And I'm telling you, because this is your toolkit. Every toolkit that you're going to pull out in ministry, every toolkit you're going to pull out in talking to people, every single thing, you're going to pull it out of that big big box called love. Your toolkit, the container your toolkit is in, is love. All the side pockets are love. The lock is love, which should not be on. It's that box that you use to minister to people. It's got to be love. That's the first order of business, because the enemy can't come against it. He has contorted it. He has contorted attention. He has manipulated and defiled it. But let me go back here. Love with respect. If girls are respected, and when I say that, cherished and loved by their daddies in a very clean, the respectful love and a dignity, so that she knows how to have dignity for herself. He treats her like she's a daughter. Of course, she goes through the training and all the stuff that a family member would go through, but her dad loves her. He has expectations for her. He has dreams for her, and he speaks to her, and he will love her no matter what. And she can come home. He will still take her back. He loves her. It's the love that a father says to a husband: if you're not going to treat her right, bring her back home, because I love this vessel, this human being, my daughter. Do not mistreat her. He will tell him that. Bring her back. If you're not going to treat her right, bring her back home. I got it. Because he's not leaving her, abandoning her. It's handed off from one strong, loving hand into another strong, loving hand. When they have not had that structure and that foundation, then they'll take anything, because it just looks like something. Anything is better than nothing. People function like that. And then you have a second generation from that anything better than nothing, and they're starved. A love-starved parents can't make a love-full child because they're starving. Love is of healing. It has healing properties that are insurmountable. And I'm going to tell you a story. The man from the shack had his mom. His mom was a nurse, and she was just becoming a nurse. So she didn't know how to not be a nurse. This is the point I was telling you. When you get in a situation and your instincts, and you have good instincts on how to love something, go for it. Don't let them. Now, you want to know how to love carefully and safely, so that you put some structure to it, so that you can continue. You want to have multiple situations. Like you're a classroom, you can't just focus on one child. You got to focus on all of them. So you have to develop some systems on how to love people, and how to make a whole room feel loved, how to make a whole room of kids feel the ray of your love on them. This is important. This is what they will come to the classroom for that. They'll come into class for that. And so so anyway, she said she was just graduated nursing school. Sometimes God got to catch you, like my husband was saying, catch the ministers that come out of ministry school before they have time to learn the ills of being a minister. They get taught by the other the ones that have become so there's a word I'm looking for, so non-sensitive. They've waxed cold in it. They've lost the sensitivity for it. You don't want them people training the new pastors, because then they'll soon lose their love for it, and it becomes a burden. So she was nursing. She was a brand new nurse. And this pastor, this is a true story, so give me a second. So pastor my wife had 4 miscarriages. And this was the 5th baby. And he had got word of some kind of a word that from the Lord, that this one was going to be a boy, and this was going to be a healthy child. This child was going to live. And so she had the baby. This is before we have all this new technology to keep a baby alive. And the doctor decided the baby wasn't going to live. and told, and because it was she miscarried, and the baby was born alive, but it was too weak the doctor's opinion, it was too weak to sustain itself. So she was there. He handed the baby to her and said, throw it into the incinerator. And maybe nicer than that, but basically, it was just flesh to him. It needed to stop breathing. And then throw it to he didn't even say that. He told her to throw it into the incinerator. And so she knew enough that the baby was breathing. And she could not throw it into the incinerator while it was breathing. So she put it into that kidney plate. The whole baby fit into the kidney plate and put it on top of next to the incinerator, but did not put it in the incinerator, was waiting for the baby to stop breathing. And so told the family the baby died, and they were mourning this great loss because the pastor thought he had a word from the Lord that the baby was going to live. And so that happened. So then she went back to look in the kidney bowl, and the baby was still breathing. So then she covered the baby in a little washcloth. He was small enough to wrap into a washcloth, and she kept him, and he stayed warm, and he kept breathing. And so then she took him over. So that went on. By the end of the day, she took him over to the neo care where the other nurses were. There's something very wonderful about nurses. Like I always tell you, the nurse learns the patient better than the doctor does, because the nurse is the one that pretty much guides the doctor, because they learn the day-to-day and the nuances and the shifts and changes. They're the one to tell the doctor what's up, and then the doctor figures out what needs to happen next. And so anyway, the neo nurses immediately started working on the baby, figuring out how to feed him with the little bird feeder, figuring out all the things that needed to happen, and so the baby was alive. So 2 days later, they kept it a secret. 2 days later, the nurses had to tell the doctor. The doctor was infuriated because he had told the parents that the baby died, and he told her, this is your responsibility, because he told her to throw that fetus, their premature fetus, into the incinerator. Now he's told her, this is your responsibility. And so then we don't know how many decisions doctors make behind the scenes about things that we never hear. We don't know what goes on behind the scenes in the hospital. And so here, it's funny, Lori told a story about abortion. Wow, I'm telling this story now. And so they kept him alive, and the baby thrived. So now 4 days later, the doctor has to go back and tell the family, we made a mistake. He isn't dead. He's alive. And it's a boy. They were rejoicing crazy. But he said, I can't promise anything. He's probably going to die. So now what the doctor was trying to avoid was extending the mourning process, giving hope to something that wasn't going to work. So rather just cut it off. That's what the doctor is probably trying to go for. But now, 4 days later, it's a miracle. They're praying for the baby, and the baby's alive. And so this little boy, he's alive. And the mother learned the name. The nurse learned the name of the baby, and she knew the pastor, the pastor's wife. She knew the name of the baby. She knew the doctor, and she just watched them throughout. She just kept tabs and watched them, and she never said a word about what happened. She never told anybody what happened, not even not even the parents. And because they didn't know what happened, they just thought they accepted whatever the doctor said, and the gentleman that happened. And so she kept watching them. And then this little boy that was supposed to be tossed into the incinerator grew up, and he became a bishop in the Episcopal Church. He grew up and became a bishop. His father and his mother were already in the ministry. And so she kept reading about it, and she waited until the doctor died and the parents, and then she went and told the parents what had actually happened to him, because they needed to know, because it's part of their family history. And then she told him what happened to him. I can't remember what order, but she eventually told the man, she looked him up and told him what happened, that he was scheduled to be tossed into the incinerator. And so time goes by, and she says I can't read, some other stuff happened, and oh yeah, this man continued. So she built a relationship with the bishop and Episcopal bishop, and she built a relationship with him, and he knew how the nurse, and he, of course, he valued her above everything because she saved his life. And so then what happened was, her son wrote the shack. This was a true story. The man that wrote the shack sent it to his mother, and she, there's different kinds of religion. Some people are very reverent, like you can't be casual with God, and then some people have a relationship with God. I have a foxhole relationship with God, a father-daughter relationship with God. I tell him probably more than I should. Well, no, it's not more than I should, but it's I tell him stuff that I probably can't repeat in public. But he has to hear it because I got to work through it, and he's the only one that understands because he put me in the situations. And so so she said it was too irreverent, and she didn't want him to publish it. The shack had people, and you saw it. I think it's Alfred Witter was in there, but it's got people in there representing Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and she just thought it was too irreverent to be a book about, and she thought there was something wrong with it. So she called the bishop, and told him to read the book, and he read it. He said it's fine, let him publish it and all that stuff. So anyway, one day time goes on, and one day is Easter, and her sister suggests, why don't we go to church? And he said, for his aunt to suggest why don't we go to church was like a miracle because she doesn't go to church. So then she said, okay, let's go to the church of the bishop, the guy that she knows, because they don't go to church. So she goes to the church, and Episcopal churches are much like Catholic churches. They wear the big, tall hats and the big gold embroidered robes and all that good stuff. And she was there, and the lady that sat next to her, a church lady, sat next to her and said, just follow me, I'll show you what to do. So you have to kneel, you have to stand up, you have to read the scriptures, you have to do this, there's a whole thing goes on. And so when they got ready to take communion, the lady tells the two other ladies, that the woman, the nurse, the ex-nurse, the retired nurse, and her sister, tells the two ladies, you can't participate in communion because you're not a member, but sit here and she'll be back, probably in that same tone. And she went up, and everybody lined up and took communion. And then something happened. The bishop was at the front of the church, this big church, and he takes off his hat, and he takes off his robe, and he takes the communion cup, and he takes the bread, and he walks to the back of the church, and he gets to the woman that is the nurse. I can't think of her name. If I did, I would say it. And he kneels down, and before he does that, he says, everyone, this is the most important communion I have to give. He says, if it wasn't for her, I would not be here today to minister to you. This woman saved my life. And he proceeded to tell the story. And then he kneeled down and gave her communion. And, of course, the sister. And then what does the church lady have to say with her mouth hanging open? I didn't know who I was sitting next to. There's a whole lot of ways to be a miracle, and you have to allow God to walk you through the back staircases, under the bridge, in the obscurities. You don't know what God is going to do with your life if you would lend it to him. And so this is the thing here. When you die, I was thinking, you need to be all used up. You need to have used every possible aspect of yourself for the furtherance of the gospel. And it's not gospel like the business of gospel. It's the craft of loving. It's the ability to love people past themselves. People that are already healthy and can appreciate your love, they're not the ones that need it, because they can love each other. They love themselves. They'll still receive it. Thank you. It's wonderful. It feels so good. But the ones that need it are the ones that reject it almost. The ones that sabotage their lives, the ones that cannot get it right to save their lives. They keep getting it wrong, and they just want to hurry up and fail, so you leave them alone so they can go ahead and sit down by themselves. This happens. Kids learn this early on. They learn I'm worthless early on because somebody's been insinuating it from the womb. I didn't want you. I don't know, since we don't have abortions, I'm grateful that we don't, but we still got to do something with those which perceived as unwanted children in the womb. There has to be a healing process where if you don't want this baby, do not tell this baby you don't want this baby. Do not think you do not want this baby. This is a beautiful blessing. You want this baby. We want this baby. We want this baby. Babies can pick up before they're breathe air. They're very, very sensitive in the spirit realm. But can you imagine being in the womb and growing the best you know how, and just being yourself and hearing the voices of angels that come in and out of the womb and talk to you, and then you pick up and you start asking, they don't want me? They don't want me? You start feeling the heartbreak of they don't want me? They don't want. Just imagine that any living thing that gets the inclination of not being wanted starts to feel like they're dying. So death can be projected in words. I don't want you is something that people can tell you all different kinds of ways. Husbands and wives tell each other that in marriage. And something starts to die. You're there, but something starts to die. I don't want you, or you hurt me, or I don't trust you. Love, trust, affections, all this all together. I can't open up and love you because something happened. And so I'm not going to leave, but I'm just going to cut this part off. I'm just going to tie my arm up and cut off the circulation until the thing just falls off. I'm here, but my limbs are gone because I can't hug you. I can't love you. Something happened. That love has to be brought back. Love is not you don't write people off. You don't write people off. You're going to have to take off your shoes. And like I told you about that lady yesterday, which is a demonstration, you're going to have to come across the street. You're going to have to cross across the United Nations space that people create to be able to coexist in peace, but let's not love each other. What is that? That's walking death. You have no right being a child of God functioning in a less than thriving, loving situation. And you will pray it back till it comes back. You don't just accept dying death. Do you want to crawl up next to a corpse and just be there? No, you don't. You refuse to allow the thing to die. You refuse to allow that thing to die. You refuse to allow people to give up on themselves, so they march themselves into prison or into suicide or into addiction or into some other self-hatred. You refuse to allow that. That is how Jesus comes. He comes. He said he came to set the captive free, to heal the brokenhearted. You know how many different ways children, babies get brokenhearted. And if puppies get brokenhearted, I don't know about cats. Cats don't really care, but they do care, but they function differently. But puppies get brokenhearted. And if a puppy gets brokenhearted, babies get brokenhearted, people get brokenhearted, and they learn how to live with their brokenheartedness. And you got to be better than that. You got to cut through all that. You got to be hard on this thing. You got to love hardcore. I don't receive that. I love you anyway. And they say, I hate you. I don't like you. I love you anyway. I love you anyway. I love you. I love you. And you start telling them what's so good about them, what's so wonderful about them. You start saturating them with the love of God. You start speaking to them. You cannot be broken and self-conscious and so insecure that you can't love anybody. You will never find true love being a scaredy cat. Love is brave. Love's for the brave. Love's for the brave and the stupid. And you have to be, if you thought about if you can afford a child, you would never have a child. That's why some of these kids have to come through, oops, because otherwise you would, okay, next year, and then now your eggs dried up and you're too old. Now you got the money, but you don't have no eggs. And then the eggs you have, maybe not. You can't have it both ways. You got to spend yourself in this thing called life. You have to spend it. It's to be spent. And one of the things you better be really good at, from the tips of your fingers to the bottom of your feet to the top of your head and all the way through your being, you need to be a walking resignation of absolute, utter love. You got to do love like the Harlem Globetrotters play with that basketball. That's how you need to love an individual. All around, upside down, backwards and frontwards, front door, back door, bring them some cookies, bring them some hugs. You just got to love. You got to get in there. That's how you love a person, because they are going to preempt you on rejection, especially if they've gotten rejected. They're going to preempt you and say, no, that's okay. That's not your answer. That's not your answer. The hard to love, the difficult cases, the broken cases. That we have a country with people all over it in that. But you start with your family. You start with each one of your kids, with your sisters, with your brothers, because you can't go outside to get this thing together. With all of them, you make a point, and individually, as a case, you're going to love them. You don't love them all the same way. You send different. Some is a text, some is a phone call, some is a letter, and handwritten letters are wonderful. But you make a point to love people, and how to love them at where they are. And some people are going to grow from first grade all the way to PhD. And some people just going to go from first grade to third grade, and they're going to die, but they moved. Okay, let me just read some of this, and then I'm going to have David do the altar call. Then I'm going to have Elsie, and then Minister Gabe, she wants to say something. Then David do the altar call. Then Elsie's going to close us out, and Lori's going to assign the hours. And Lori, God bless you. Don't worry about your memory. I did not realize that you were having that kind of problem, and I really be asking you for stuff to be done. If you can't do it, say I can't do it. Just say that. Don't force yourself.
The horrible thing is sometimes I don't know I can't do it until after the fact. But I've been very conscious to try not to over commit or to commit very lightly.
Okay, very good. I didn't realize that I went over it. Okay. Amen. Okay. So then, listen to this, guys. When you die, your Bible should be worn out. When you die, your Bible should be worn out. Certain pages flipped constantly, names written in it, notes written. Your Bible should be worn out. Your shoes need to be worn out because you've been functioning. Your hands need to be soft. Look at this. Soft because you use anointing, but strong. Strong from pulling and lifting, holding and hugging people. You know how to do that. It's something about once you've had a couple of kids, you know how to manage the body, the small little frail body of a baby. And it's not frail, but it's small. You just get good at it. You know how to change diapers. You just know how to handle that, the littleness of it. And then you can gauge and you start looking at their limbs and you start understanding something about the growth. It's nothing like having a kid will wear you out, but it is a very good description on how to love, because they need everything. And they're completely selfish, and they need everything, and then you wind up doing it. But it's a very good platform for how to love, pass, and not. You don't have to. It's not give or take. It's just give. It's going to come back. They're going to grow. The flower's going to open up, and they're going to get it together.